hospital. So they were worse for wear. They had all the student debt they accumulated. They really did not have the academic preparedness to be successful. So they were worse for wear. They had debt and they had no degree, or they had a credential that really didn't mean a lot to employers. So that motivated me to look at the phenomenon of private for-profit and public education. And since I was in adult education, I looked at graduate students. In any event, I was inspired to use this theoretical framework because it was very, very comprehensive, and it allowed me to look at the way that adults mature over time in a developmental way. So it also incorporates what's called mimetics, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So today I'm going to share the first part of the presentation, and my theme, I guess, of sorts, is educators are leaders and set the tone. They set the tone for the classroom, and they also set the tone for the overall environment of learning. And so the first part of what I'm going to do today is talk about the foundations of spiral dynamic theory. And all of you got the handout, right? So you had a chance to read it. Did you enjoy it? It's fascinating, isn't it? Okay, so I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to use to go through some of the constructs that they talked about. And I actually incorporated video clips from popular culture of sorts. So we got some Game of Thrones in there. And I use that to help give some context and understanding of that particular worldview that's in operation. And so my plan is, in part two, the second tier level of the framework, I'm going to discuss in more detail because I won't be able to get to all of that today. And then I'm also going to talk about the process of dynamic change, how we go from viewing the world in one particular way to another way that is representative of an evolutionary progression. The last part will be our getting together in small groups and going through some educational scenarios that I set up, and we're going to try to identify what particular spiral dynamic theory worldview that's in operation among the actors, and what might be the best way to problem solve what they're facing in the context of these scenarios I set up. So then we'll debrief and have a conclusion. So I start out with my personal pearl of wisdom about education in general, and it is avoid at all costs any cookie cutter approaches to teaching and learning. And that's largely because the educational context changes so quickly. When I went away to work on my PhD in 2010, so I came back in 2016, started teaching again, the nature of education had changed. The way the students were, the pressures and expectations of teachers had changed, and also the philosophy and ideologies of administrators had changed drastically. And I had an older sister who is my education role model. She's been a teacher for over 30 years. And she told me things have changed a lot. So don't come in here with your bright-eyed, bushy-tailed self. But I did anyway. In any event, because educators set the tone, it's important to know what and who we bring to the learning environment. And I think that the spiral dynamic theory framework helps us to do that. And what's so valuable about this framework is that the research that undergirds it was based on normal, healthy adults. So it doesn't make provisions for abnormal people, whatever that means, but it doesn't deal with psychological pathology in short. But what's important to note is that spiral dynamic theory examines the ways of thinking and the deep values that we hold that reflect our worldview. It also does not explain personality types, so I wanted to be clear about this. This is not like some of those Briggs-Myers that say your personality is like this. This is an assessment of how people view the world based upon his research and narratives that he did with his students, and also some other more quantitative-based research approaches. The other thing to note about spiral dynamic theory, it's not an IQ assessment, because we know that measures of intelligence are subjective, and I don't know if you all are, but I'm a real fan of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. And so we can find people in society, I think it's fair to say, by all accounts on paper, they're intelligent, but in terms of common sense, they leave us wanting. So intelligence is subjective. And so just because somebody has a high IQ, their intelligence is contextual. So I think that's important to know. So this framework, you can have someone who may in fact, by all accounts, seem to be described as an intelligent person, but once you listen to them talk and the worldview that they hold is very simplistic. So spiral dynamic theory was created by a psychologist named Claire Graves, and he actually works here in the Northeast Ohio area. He was a criminal psychologist for the Cuyahoga court system, and he also was a professor at Case Western Reserve University. But it was at Union College where he fully developed this theory, and he used the psychology students as part of the research to undergird his theoretical framework. His theory is a model of adult development, and most of the theories that we have in the field of education are largely based on children and adolescents. And so my field of adult education is very excited per the Revise and Resubmit article response I got. They're very interested in seeing some theories that deal with adult development. Because we had a tendency, and I think this is based on the history of Maslow and these models that said that people reach this point of self-actualization or adults peak at this point of maturity and that's it. Well, Claire Graves is of the view that adult thinking and adult development was open-ended. And so that we had this capacity for higher order thinking that's never ending. And so as a result of that, his model was called the emergent cyclical level of existence theory. And that's what that acronym there is for. Of course, spiral dynamics is easier to say. And his two protege, Don Beck and Chris Cohen, who wrote the book based upon his research, the book was called Spiral Dynamics. So when you hear people talk about the theory, it actually is more so Claire's theory of the emergent cyclical level of existence theory. So I like to give credit when credit is due. And in any event, even though he never used the word memes or memetics, when I started looking at his research and now analyzing his approach, I was like, this is memetics. Then I started looking more into the memetic literature. So how I present the information is spiral dynamic theory, and it very much has a component that's called memetic science literature. But what's important is that his theory looks at the deep values that we hold that aren't always conscious. Spiral dynamic theory is an evolutionary hierarchical ontology, and we know our ontology are our values, our sense of reality, and all those things go into helping us interpret and navigate and negotiate the material world. So his theoretical model looks at how adults' sense of reality evolves over time as a function of their capacity to engage in existential crisis and then problem solve those crises based upon their psychological and neurological capacities. Again, the framework moves from a simplistic to a more complex way of thinking, and it moves in a hierarchical spiral, hence the name spiral dynamic theory. And so it's a very dynamic framework. What was interesting and unique about Claire's approach is that it was an open-ended theoretical framework of adult development, and he also held that change was not inevitable. So we have, I think, in Western culture, this tendency to want to have like happy endings, and that human beings have this awesome ability to become better persons. And so as a function of this theoretical framework, he held that change was not inevitable. So we can have people who live out the existence of their life with a particular worldview that they have no desire or no need to change. So you can have a Homer Simpson be very content to go to work every day and just live a very uncomplicated life. So spiral dynamic theory operates within three domains: on the individual level, the organizational level, and the societal level. And that kind of makes sense because organizations are made up of people, and so are society. But the application of these constructs has shown themselves to be relevant in each one of those domains. So when we first talk about what undergirds our values, we have to look at it from 3 different levels. And the literature I gave you talked about that too. But we start off with this very surface level that we have no problems with people seeing, and it usually incorporates religion, laws, common sense, and we have no problem sharing or displaying to others. But there's this other aspect of our values that are more hidden. And so I use the analogy of the iceberg, where here would be our surface values, and then here are our conscious hidden values. So these involve maybe some long-standing beliefs, attitudes, and traditions that you hold. These hidden values undergird those surface values, but we don't necessarily openly talk to people about those particular values. Then we have what are called our deep values. And that's what spiral dynamic theory is based in. These deep value systems that we hold that are a lot of times very unconscious. And the deep value layers that we hold direct the hidden values, which subsequently direct our surface values. And so, in what ways might we appropriate and pass on our deep values and our cultural worldviews? My argument or my claim is that we do it mimetically. And so, people hear the word meme and you instantly think of social media pictures, but really memes are a lot deeper than that. So memetics is a theory and form of academic study that holds that mental units of culture are transferred through non-genetic imitation. So if anybody can remember your basic biology classes, when you think about the gene operates through a process of replication, variation, and natural selection in the effort to preserve a species. So a species will pass on its genetic code and those characteristics of that code that allows it to survive in a particular environment. That's the same concept of a meme. But instead of genetic transfer, the transfer is through human imitation. So we embrace ideas, thoughts, and concepts and beliefs that we get from other people. And we make changes to it to make it relevant to our reality. And so the meme is unique, as I said, because it mirrors the biological gene in its operation. But it does this process of replication, variation, natural selection non-genetically. I'm going to make the argument later, because I'm really into epigenetics too, that I'm not sure that memes are all non-genetic, but that'll be another subject matter. But that's my little preview. So the meme concept really was being developed by a number of scholars, but the word meme has been credited to Richard Dawkins. So he took this meme concept and he created the word meme that we have commonly known today. And so Dawkins is a zoologist. And sometimes I disagree with his descriptions because in addition to being a biologist, I am also a Christian. So I don't embrace a lot of Dawkins' ideas, but I think that he does a good job in explaining what the meme is. So I'm going to show you this little short clip because it's going to help me in explaining spiral dynamic theory, the constructs of the framework better.
It looks like an epidemic, it behaves like a virus. That is memes, that's the spread of memes. My first book, The Selfish Gene, published in 1976, was all about the gene as the unit of selection. The gene, the universal replicator DNA. I wanted to make the point that although DNA was the unit of selection in life, any unit of selection would do if it were a replicator that faithfully copied itself. So I wanted another example. I could have used a computer virus, but I think they hadn't been invented then. So I used the meme instead, the unit of cultural inheritance. Anything that's copied, in this case from brain to brain. It could be something like a tune that you whistle, and somebody else picks up the tune and whistles it again, and then it spreads like an epidemic. Blue tits, the birds in Britain, learned how to open milk bottles. Milk bottles in Britain used to be put on the doorstep every morning. And one rather clever bird learned how to open the milk bottle, and then it spread as an epidemic because others imitated it. That's a meme. The reverse baseball cap is a meme. Anything that's imitated, anything that spreads by imitation. We talk about things on the internet going viral. That is memes. That's the spread of memes. To the extent that some memes spread better than others, that's a kind of natural selection. So I wasn't really attempting to make a contribution to the study of human culture. I was rather attempting to downplay the gene as the only unit of natural selection.
So one of the things he didn't emphasize as much as I would have liked is the idea that even though it replicates, it undergoes a process of variation, which makes it suitable for selection. So recently, I'm going to use an image meme as an example. So we have this image meme, and they can travel very, very quickly on social media, as we all know. So is anybody familiar with the Dove campaign? Okay. So you have this campaign where this black woman and Dove is engaged in this representation of the use of their soap. And the black woman takes the shirt off and she reveals a white woman. And people went bananas about this meme. And even though there were other women who also, I think somebody removed, after she removed her shirt, an Indian woman was revealed. The reaction to this was based in my view, of mimetic history. So you have people who kind of made jokes about the memes in order to kind of adjust to the offensiveness. And here you have a black guy, he said when the cops show up to the party, and he said, and they got like a little dove down there, so he's making fun, instead of being black, he'll turn into a white man. And then here people have fun with Michael Jackson's image with the meme. But what the historical relationship for this particular meme and why it bothered them. Okay, so hopefully that'll all get going. But the next picture is a representation of the notion that black skin was dirty, and that in order to move this this soap advertisement is that you have this little black boy here in the tub, and in order to get a more beautiful complexion or improve his complexion, after using this soap, he became white. And so that's an example of a meme or a notion that people really objected to because it was based in this historical notion that black skin was dirty. And so that's an example of a meme I thought that worked pretty well in terms of an image meme. So identifying the mimetic worldview constructs of the spiral dynamic theory framework. So the spiral dynamic theory framework is really cool because it has like these two tiers, and it also oscillates between notions of individualism. So when you look at these mimetic constructs on this side of the framework, they all tend to be more individualistic in nature in that worldview. Then you have this side that's represented by the more cooler, calmer colors that serve as a mnemonic device to represent collectivism. So a person's worldview orientation tends to be more individualistic as they operate within this particular worldview construct. And then on this side, when they're operating here, they tend to be more collectivist in their orientation. Now, what's really interesting about this framework and what makes it a spiral is that as people progress in their maturity, in their adult development, they move from a very simplistic, basic form of viewing the world in a zigzag motion that goes from individualistic, collectivist, individualistic, collectivist, and back and forth like that. And at each level, each permutation, your ability to address existential crisis increases. The degrees of freedom that you develop in order to solve a problem increase. And as you make these movements on the framework, what's also cool is that these systems are subsuming. In other words, these ways of knowing, seeing the world, and problem solve get buried within your unconscious. And if you're faced with an existential crisis, you may regress to a lower order form of thinking because you remember the tools you use to solve the problem. But the existential crisis or the problem is new. So the ways in which you resolve that problem will not work in this new reality that you come into. So here, if you solved your problem in the power impulsive, you might resolve conflict through fisticuffs. You'll fight somebody. Well, that might not be so cool to be in church fighting people. So you have to think of another way to resolve that conflict or that crisis that you find in a new existential reality. But as I said, there is this capacity for regression, and a lot of times when you think about change dynamics, sometimes we do regress as we move into dynamic change, because we realize and we refer in our mind, well, how did I solve this problem before? This is how I did it before. Well, it doesn't work in this new reality, and so that kind of spurs us on to the next level of, hierarchical cognitive thinking. So, Claire Graves, in his theory, he said that the majority of people operate at this tier 1 level. And at this level, you're concerned about meeting your basic needs. And as you arrive at tier 2, you really don't have the challenges of basic needs, because your life, your circumstances, your reality, and even your resources are greater. So your ability to think about loftier things are enhanced, because you're not worried about, what am I going to eat today? Am I going to have shelter today? Is somebody going to come repossess my car today? So you're not operating in that kind of reality. So your worldview and the things that are important and matter to you do not incorporate those kind of challenges. So, as I said, today I'm going to focus on these 6, because this is probably the majority of what most of us see in our daily lives. But I am going to give you an example of the tier 2 and examples that I felt were representative of that. Now, in his research, he did studies to examine mostly these, and he started examining some of these. Now, remember, Claire Graves' work started in 1961, and he died in 1986. So the world has changed a lot since 1986. And I felt, in following his footsteps and the direction he was going with his research, that I have been able to identify these kind of worldview constructs and people who represent that. And I'm going to be sharing that with you guys in the video clips when I come on the next visit. But right now we're going to focus on this first tier level. So again, why spiral dynamics metaphor? It's because the framework moves in this little spiral pattern. So you go from that very simplistic beige to the purple, from the purple to the red, from the red to the blue. And so you get this kind of movement that's hierarchical. But what's fascinating is that you sometimes could be in an exiting phase of another system and peaked in one and then entering another. So you could have representation of 3 types of worldviews in operation with one dominating. And I'll talk more about that as we progress. But again, the spiral moves from a simplistic, limited ability for complexity to a more higher order cognition. So, of course, Claire Graves could not study cavemen. They were not available in 1961. So he used a lot of anthropological records to construct this first level, the beige level, which he called, or has been called in the spiral dynamic theory literature, the value mean construct of instinctiveness. And so this particular construct of the frame, the V represents value, and then memes represents that particular meme. And the colors are used as a mnemonic device to kind of help you remember the theme associated with it. But the first letter represents the type of existential problem you face, and then the second letter represents the neurology you have to solve that. Again, this could be a whole semester class, honestly, but I'm just trying to give you a rudimentary introduction to it. So what you would expect to see in this kind of worldview is an individual who's centered around the satisfaction of their basic biological human needs. So they're focused on food, water, shelter, protection from danger. Also represented in this particular worldview construct is an individual who's driven by instinct and genetic imperatives. There's little awareness of the self as a distinct, complex being. One lives off the land much like an animal. There's no, big sky rises being developed. People have little impact or control over the living environment. They just live. Existence is centered around survival. And again, there's very little self-awareness. There's low complexity in the capacity to think. And representations of this particular worldview in some of the other research has associated to the state of what you would see in a newborn baby. A person who could be a victim of a coma or had a stroke, a person with autism or Alzheimer's, mental illness, and people like who are living on the street and are suffering with issues of mental illness. And so it's representative of what he called first human societies. Now the next permutation would be the mental construct that's been described as clannish. So in this construct, you move from that individualistic orientation beige to the more purple collectivist, purple worldview. So in this worldview, it values obedience to the desires of a mystical spiritual being. You see an allegiance to elders. Matriarchy and patriarchy systems are real strong. And there's an adherence to group customs and clan preservation. There is a need to preserve sacred places, objects, and rituals. There is a clan bonding that takes place that brings people together for purposes of problem solving and safety and protection. And then you also see that this particular worldview has a person who lives in an enchanted, spiritual, or magical world. And there is a seeking to achieve harmony and oneness with nature and its power. And so this representation, I thought, fit very, very well. And before you start to think, people don't live like that. And I kind of did that too. But then I started thinking about my own background because my family is part Native American. And so I looked at this and I said, wow, interesting. I can identify with some of that. And so let me play this for you all to watch. Hopefully this won't get caught up like it did before.
You don't think that anything he's doing is helping the situation? Is he an improvement over Stephen Harper? I mean, Tom Eckert, is it?
Excuse me, did I just hear you correctly? How can he be blamed for that? Excuse me. Don't speak to us that way.
Stop right now. You do not speak to us that way. We are human beings, and the way that you're speaking to us
It's not acceptable.
you are not.
No, stop it. Stop it right now.
We don't want you here. Can you please leave?
Step out.
Step out.
Step out. Then I don't want to hear from you.
You have no right.
You don't speak to us like that.
Simple question.
Yeah.
Answer.
And this is the problem, the way you communicate.
I'm not insinuating anything. I'm looking for information.
I'm not going to argue with you. I'm
not
going to
arguing
stop.
either.
No, stop. Stop. You need to stop.
I'm only.
You need to stop. Stop. Kipishchi.
You don't.
Mona tinduan na mitin sa mani na miyak. Asha wa ishkat titos sa mani na minan. Kikis sa kasko na ay mani na miyak. Tapos ko sa ikain inuyak. E kwan i-ispanik. E kwan magamosya ko may tatako siyak. Tapos ko sa ikis sa kagipat siyak. You're a guest here. And you don't even know how to speak to us. You don't even recognize the tone in your voice and your delivery. And no, you're done. You're done. Next question.
I'll re-ask this question. How do you think? Yes. How do you think?
You better be respectful.
I'm being fully respectful. I'm asking how Justin Trudeau's record compared to Stephen Harper's record. Do you think he's improved the situation? I think that's what he's asking.
We have a holistic genocide happening here.
Don't speak on behalf of Julie.
I can speak for myself.
And I can speak for myself. You know what, white people? You've had your voice here for 524 years. 524 years you've been visible, white lady. You've been visible for 524 years. Look how fast your white man comes and steps up for you. Where is everybody else to come and step up for us? I have a right to my voice. I'm still fighting for my voice and my visibility. And I'm telling you right now, there has been 524 years of holistic genocide on Turtle Island. We're the ones that are dying. It's not you that is dying. And as far as how Justin Trudeau is doing, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we're asking the United Nations to help us that charges of genocide, a war against humanity, war crimes, and a crime of aggression be laid, because your Liberal Party was also responsible. Every party, every government that has been in power, there's been a war conflict of Indian residential school, 60 Scoop, Indian Day School, and Millennium Scoop. None of your governments have clean hands. All of your governments have blood on their hands. None of you are different. You haven't changed because you haven't started your healing journeys. The moment that we have our voice and our backbone, you want to shut us down. And you think you're privileged to disrespect us. The moment we tell you, because of your colonial mindset and your colonial way of being, your white privilege, your white fragility, you can't take our truth. Look how many people came to bat for you, white lady, and you're a guest here. Without us, you'd be homeless. This is over.
Okay. So I thought that video showed a good example of a number of things. Did you see the feather she had in her hand? So you had that, spiritual, article, and then she did the chant, when she was, calling on the spirits, I guess, to get some calm in the room. And then you also saw the matriarchy there, and how the young people, even though they initially were at the podium, they stepped back and stood behind the elders. And so I thought that was a very, very good representation of that system, and also aspects of the next system, which I'm going to talk about, which is the movement from the more collectivist purple to red. So we're moving back to that more individualistic system. And this system is called the egocentric system. And it's characterized by a worldview that exists of haves and have-nots. And that your goal is to be a have. And whatever it takes to be a have, you'll do that to be a have. And so what's important is in this system is that you avoid shame and demand respect. So as I said, when you saw in that last video, you have this this dynamic inclusion of purple and red and how she represented herself. And she kept talking about and valuing respect. So that, in terms of this particular system, is a priority. And you defend your reputation. The other thing in this system or worldview is that there's low impulse control. So looking to to have self-gratification immediately is very much a part of this particular orientation. One will fight remorselessly and without guilt in order to break free of any imposed constraints being placed on them. It does not exercise the benefit of foresight. So it does not mediate what could happen in terms of future consequences. And so there's unconstrained risk taken at this level, and one values power and domination. It believes, or this orientation or this worldview holds that life is a jungle. And so you need to position yourself to be successful in negotiating that jungle. And so this is the first level of self-awareness in terms of the spiral dynamic theory constructs. And so I chose this clip because I felt like it represented that well. Any Game of Thrones fans in here? All right. Can y'all see this? No. Okay, let's hit the lights. Yeah, please. This is a little bit harder to see.
promised to be here by midday.
They're here, my lord.
Well, what are they doing? Trimming their cunt hairs? Tell them to come here, now.
They're already here, my lord. Here, my lord. They weren't easy to carve, especially Black Waldo.
My name is Arya Stark. I want you to know that. The last thing you're ever going to see is a Stark smiling down at you as you die.
So we had that, you can hit the light again. So we had that representation of the power impulsive. And when someone might resort to violence in order to exercise their control over the particular environment, and I thought that was a good representation of that. You clearly could see the remorselessness in the woman as she slit the guy's throat. And this particular worldview, if we were to look historically, has been associated to feudalism at the time when, you know, societies existed that way. And I think this will be the last one I'll be able to do with our time constraints. And so at least I'm moving you guys to a more relaxed, calmer, mimetic worldview. So this one is called The Purposeful Life. And it is representative, again, we've made the pivot over from that individualism imperative back to the collectivist. And the idea is that once you're in this particular worldview and system, there becomes a point of dissatisfaction when this way of looking and negotiating the life becomes unsatisfactory to you. And so the next logical, evolutionary, adult, healthy maturity would move you to the next level. And in that next level, you're going to see an ability to deal with complexity and problem solve on a higher level. So we move from that red power impulsive to this blue sacrificing self to an idealized life path in pursuit of meaning. And so in this particular system, you'll see a phenomenon like martyrdom being very much associated to it. One seeks to bring order and stability to all things chaotic. Controlling impulsive desires and being sensitive to feelings of guilt are very much a part of this system. Enforcing rules of righteous living under a divine plan that assigns people to a place in life. Obedience and following the rules of authority figures are privileged in this particular worldview. Destiny is controlled by a single driving omnipotent force that's external to you. So another thing you'll see with these particular worldviews as it relates to the collectivism individualism theme is that the locus control with the individualist theme is internal, but the locus of control with the collectivist theme are external. So there's some imperative outside of you that is controlling and directing your destiny. There is a high attention given to what is right, proper, and good in this system. And I think this very much describes the context of education. And so we'll look at this one to help you appreciate this particular worldview concept. I don't think we're going to have to turn the light on.
I think your hair is yellow.
Okay.
I think human nature is to, like, just make them like you or do things in their favor.
Okay.
When we are young, we naturally wish to please our parents, our teachers, our ministers and rabbis. Even as adults, we wish to please authority figures, such as our boss at work. However, if obedience to authority causes us to ignore our own ethical standards, big trouble can result.
Okay.
There was a time when we ran out of like some really bold coffee, and my manager was just like, just give them a light one. Like, they're not gonna know, coffee is coffee. I kind of felt bad because it wasn't what they wanted and wasn't what they were paying for. But I was like, okay, well, if the manager says yes, then here's the bold coffee.
When people in organizations make decisions, they are often much more concerned about the acceptability of the decision to the people to whom they are accountable than they are about the content of the decision itself. Studies show CFOs are more likely to illicitly manage earnings when it profits their CEOs than when it profits themselves. In other words, they act unethically primarily to please their bosses, not to put money in their own pockets.
I worked at CVS Pharmacy, and every week we would have different sales, and a lot of times regular customers, they would find these sales and use manufacturer's coupons. So basically they were getting more money back than they were paying, and even though it was technically right, it was harming our store, and so my manager didn't like that. My manager just told me to say that we were sold out of them so that the customer couldn't buy anymore. It kind of made me a little uncomfortable just because I didn't have a reason really to lie at all. I don't know the person, but I kind of just did it because it was something small and my boss told me to.
Private emails sent by stock analysts during the dot-com boom often indicated that the analysts wished they had the courage to stand up to their superiors and call them like they saw them. But usually, these analysts failed to do so. Instead, they continued to knuckle under to supervisory pressure to hype questionable stocks so that their firms could gain investment banking business. Most of us simply do not realize how much our desire to please superiors and our consequent tendency to defer to authority will cloud our ethical judgment when the time comes to make decisions.
Okay.
If it's an authority figure like a boss that you really like, or you really need to like you, that I have a tendency to commit to something without thinking about what else I have. So if a boss asks me to stay late, I may say, yes, of course I can, because I want to do this project right. I want to make sure you like it. It's ready when you want it to be, without thinking about previous engagements I've made to other people and disappointing other people in my life, or attending to my own needs, which can kind of conflict with what I actually need to do outside of my job.
A study of nurses by Hoffling and Brotzman found that when members of one group of nurses were asked whether they would follow a physician's instructions to give a patient an injection of an obviously excessive dose of a drug that was not even on the hospital's approved list, almost all the nurses said they would not do so. But when a second group of nurses were actually given such instructions, virtually every one of them was prepared to do so before they were stopped by the experimenters.
As a freshman, I got elected to student government as a business school representative, and I would just feel so much pressure to please the executive board. Right away, I found myself in a situation where maybe I was voting to please the executive board and to make them think well of me so that I would get certain perks and promotions. It's one of those things where it's unconscious until it comes to fruit. And then afterwards, you're very conscious of what you just did.
More concerning than people consciously acting unethically in order to stay in their boss's good graces is the fact that sometimes employees are so intent upon pleasing their superiors that they do not even notice the ethical aspects of a decision. Eagle Bud Crow, who became infamous as head of the plumbers unit operating out of President Nixon's White House, was instructed to oversee a break-in at the office of the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg, who had leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, embarrassing the Nixon administration. Crow later explained that he was so intent upon pleasing his superiors, who were, after all, among the most powerful people in the world, that he never even activated his own ethical sense to judge the morality of what he was trying to accomplish. He did not see the ethical dimensions of his situation until it was too late. Bud Crow's experience should be a warning to us all. While it is usually a fine thing for us to please our supervisors, we must keep a lookout for ethical issues. And we must never defer so completely to our bosses that we substitute their orders for our own ethical standards. Okay.
I'm homosexual, I'm gay. And my mom asked me when I was younger to like go and, I don't know, talk to my pastor about it and like basically to see what was wrong with me. After a while, I told her, you know, I personally am not okay with this because I'm not hurting anyone, you know, knowing they were gonna be angry about it instead of just lying about it. That was hard, but in the long run, I think it helped me out because it helped me be a prouder person, and it did help me come to the point to where it feels good to be truthful.
I think just listening to that inner voice is key.
The sort of environment that helped me be able to speak up is one where you're treated as an equal, at least on a personal level.
Remember that there's really big consequences to acting unethically sometimes, and just one time can destroy a program, can destroy a person, like what they've worked for their entire life.
I think if you keep those ideas in mind, it'll be easier for you to say, that's not ethical, and I'm not going to do that.
So, since we only have an hour, we are going to have to stop there. But it's going to be so interesting to do the next one because, of course, it's going to be almost a totally different worldview. We're going to orient back to the individualism, and I'm really excited about showing you the next clip, so it's going to be a cliffhanger. But one of the things I wanted to point out to your attention is that it's important or valuable to know these worldviews because what you'll see in the framework, if you go back and refer to it, and I'll bring it next time, those systems that are directly across from each other have the most conflict. So you'll see a conflict between the purple and the red. You'll see a conflict between the blue and the orange. But what's fascinating is those in the same systems get along better. So even though you have a person with the red-oriented thinking, they would admire the person with the orange-oriented thinking because that person has not only gone through that red permutation, but they've made the adjustment or the evolutionary shift that allowed them to be more successful in the new environment in a higher order form of thinking. And you'll see an ability for those two to relate better with each other than someone who is right next door to them in a more collectivist system. And that's going to be the value as we move forward, and I give you these scenarios. And you'll see how people will interact with each other and how certain I don't want to say personalities, I almost slipped and said that, how certain worldviews work more harmoniously together than others. So that's all I have for now. I hope y'all enjoyed that, and I look forward to coming back and starting on the next system. Thank you.